The small coastal town of Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, was a peaceful place where everyone knew each other. I, Tara, a young nurse, lived a calm and predictable routine working at the local hospital. In 2005, everything changed with the arrival of Hurricane Katrina. The forecasts were frightening, and fear quickly took over the community. We knew the hurricane would be devastating, but we had no idea of the true horror we would face. In the days leading up to Katrina's arrival, the hospital frantically prepared. Windows were boarded up, and we stocked up on medical supplies. My colleagues and I received detailed instructions on how to act in an emergency. Many residents chose to seek refuge in the hospital, believing it to be the safest place to face the storm. On the night the hurricane finally hit the city, the winds howled around the hospital, and the electricity failed almost immediately, leaving us in darkness, except for the weak emergency lights. The walls shook with the force of the wind, and each gust intensified the screams of fear from those sheltered. The feeling of dread was palpable, and we all knew the situation was extremely serious. I was in the main corridor trying to calm a mother with 2 young children when I heard the first screams. They were distant, almost muffled by the sound of the storm, but distinct enough to make me stop and pay attention. A chill ran down my spine. The screams came from one of the most isolated wings of the hospital. I grabbed a flashlight and began walking toward the sound, my heart pounding fast. As I approached, the screams grew louder and more desperate. The flashlight illuminated only small parts of the dark corridor ahead of me, and with each step, my fear grew. I reached the door of the psychiatric wing, which was locked, and realized that the screams were coming from inside. This wing had been temporarily deactivated due to renovations, and the patients had been transferred to other facilities. However, it seemed that someone had been left behind. The gravity of the situation began to reveal itself, and I knew I had to act quickly, even though fear paralyzed me. As I stood before the locked door of the psychiatric wing, the screams became increasingly desperate. A sense of urgency propelled me to find a way in. I remembered there was a master key at the nursing station. I ran back through the dark corridor, trying to ignore the deafening sound of the wind and the building's tremors. Each second seemed like an eternity. I found the master key and returned to the door of the psychiatric wing. My hands trembled as I tried to fit the key into the lock. After a few moments, I finally managed to unlock the door. Upon opening, I was hit by a smell of mold and abandonment. The wing was dark, and the screams echoed through the empty corridors. I illuminated the path with my flashlight and began to search for the patients. I walked down the corridors, my heart beating faster and faster. Finally, I found the patients in a room at the back, huddled together and in panic. Some were screaming, others crying, and all were visibly terrified. The situation was critical, and I knew I needed to act quickly to get them out before the building collapsed. The structure was already compromised, with cracks in the walls and pieces of the ceiling falling. "You're safe now. I'm here to help," I said, trying to convey a calm that I didn't feel. I began to guide the patients one by one out of the wing, facing strong winds and flying debris in the corridor. With each step, the building's structure seemed to give way more, and the fear that it would collapse on us was constant. But the determination to save those lives gave me the strength to continue. Finally, I managed to get all the patients to a safer area of the hospital. They were exhausted and in shock, but alive. The screams ceased, replaced by sobs and murmurs of gratitude. As the storm continued to roar outside, we sheltered in a part of the hospital that seemed more stable, hoping the worst would pass. The experience was traumatic, but the relief of having saved those lives gave me a sense of accomplishment I will never forget. As we sheltered in the safest part of the hospital, the storm continued to roar with full force. The deafening sound of the winds and the feeling that the building could give in at any moment created an atmosphere of constant tension. However, we were alive and, for now, out of immediate danger. I was exhausted, but I could not allow fatigue to take over. I needed to ensure that everyone was safe and well cared for. The patients I had rescued from the psychiatric wing were visibly shaken. Some still cried, while others were in a state of silent shock. As a nurse, it was my duty to provide them with some comfort. I quickly assessed the physical and emotional conditions of each one. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured, but all needed care. As the storm raged outside, the first signs of relief began to appear. A group of rescuers finally managed to reach the hospital, braving the fierce winds and debris. When I saw the lights of their flashlights and heard the voices of the rescuers, immense relief took over me. I helped guide the rescuers to the patients, quickly explaining the situation and the conditions of each one. Evacuating the hospital was a monumental challenge. The structure was compromised, and each move had to be made with extreme caution. With the help of the rescuers, we managed to move the patients out of the building, one by one, braving the elements and the constant threat of collapse. Each step felt like a victory, and the determination to save lives drove us to continue, despite the fear and exhaustion. Finally, all the patients were evacuated to a temporary shelter, where they could receive the necessary care and be away from immediate danger. I sat down, exhausted, but with a sense of accomplishment. The experience of that night was traumatic and would leave deep marks on all of us, but it also showed us the strength of humanity and the importance of never giving up, even in the most desperate situations. In the days that followed, the city began to recover slowly. Volunteers and rescue teams arrived to help with the reconstruction and support the residents affected by the hurricane. My story of rescuing the patients from the psychiatric ward spread throughout the community, and many people called me a hero. Although I felt uncomfortable with that title, I knew I had done what was necessary to save lives. The experience transformed me, giving me a new perspective on life and the importance of being prepared for any eventuality. This terrifying experience would never completely disappear from my mind, but it made me stronger and more determined to help others. Hurricane Katrina left a legacy of destruction, but it also revealed the resilience and courage of ordinary people who become unlikely heroes in times of crisis. Life in the quiet village on the outskirts of Chattanooga, Tennessee, was peaceful and predictable. I, Darren, lived with my wife and 2 young children in a cozy home that had been in my family for generations. It was a typical day in 2018 when the unexpected happened. We were at home, enjoying a sunny morning, when the ground began to shake violently. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. The furniture started to sway, shelves fell, and dishes broke on the floor. The noise was deafening, as if a train was passing through our house. My first instinct was to protect my family. We ran outside where the situation was even more chaotic. Houses around us were collapsing, and the earth seemed alive, moving under our feet. Our neighborhood was built on an old mining area, and with the earthquake, landslides began to occur. The scene was apocalyptic. People screamed, searching for loved ones, and the dust from collapsing houses filled the air. That's when I realized that my youngest son, Jake, was not with us. Indescribable dread took hold of me. My wife held our older daughter, trying to keep her calm, while I began to search desperately for Jake. Life in the quiet village on the outskirts of Chattanooga, Tennessee, was peaceful and predictable. I, Darren, lived with my wife and 2 young children in a cozy home that had been in my family for generations. It was a typical day in 2018 when the unexpected happened. We were at home, enjoying a sunny morning, when the ground began to shake violently. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. The furniture started to sway, shelves fell, and dishes broke on the floor. The noise was deafening, as if a train was passing through our house. My first instinct was to protect my family. We ran outside, where the situation was even more chaotic. Houses around us were collapsing, and the earth seemed alive, moving under our feet. Our neighborhood was built on an old mining area, and with the earthquake, landslides began to occur. The scene was apocalyptic. People screamed, searching for loved ones, and the dust from collapsing houses filled the air. That's when I realized that my youngest son, Jake, was not with us. Indescribable dread took hold of me. My wife held our older daughter, trying to keep her calm, while I began to search desperately for Jake. I began to call for Jake with all my strength, hoping he could hear my voice and respond. Each aftershock made me lose my balance, but I refused to stop. I saw that several old houses were completely destroyed, and the ground seemed unstable. It was a nightmarish scene, and with each step, the fear of not finding my son grew. After a few minutes of frantic searching, I saw a slight movement under the rubble of a house. I ran over and began to remove the debris with my hands, ignoring the pain and fatigue. Each stone I removed revealed a little more of what was beneath. Finally, I saw Jake's small hand, and my heart nearly stopped with relief. He was trapped, but he appeared to be conscious. "Jake, I'm here, son. I'm going to get you out of there," I shouted, trying to keep calm in my voice so as not to frighten him further. Jake looked at me with eyes full of fear, but also hope. I continued to remove the debris around him, faster and faster, but careful not to cause more collapses. Adrenaline gave me strength, but time seemed like a relentless enemy. Finally, I managed to free Jake from the rubble. I hugged him tightly, feeling indescribable relief. He was dirty and bruised, but he was alive. "Come on, son. We need to get out of here fast," I said, picking him up and starting to run back to the safe area. The tremors continued, but now my focus was solely on taking him to a safe place and finding my wife and daughter. We reached the spot where my wife and daughter were waiting, and the relief on their faces was immediate. We embraced, crying with relief and gratitude that we were all alive. The earthquake had destroyed our village, but we had managed to survive. The experience was transformative and made me realize the importance of being prepared for natural disasters. My priority now was to ensure the safety and well-being of my family and to help my community rebuild and prepare for future emergencies. After the initial chaos subsided and we gathered in a temporary shelter, the reality of the destruction caused by the earthquake began to set in. Our village, once peaceful and welcoming, was in ruins. Many families had lost their homes, and the infrastructure was severely damaged. Fear and despair were everywhere, but there was also a sense of collective determination to overcome the tragedy. My experience rescuing Jake deeply marked me. The feeling of helplessness in the face of the disaster, combined with the gratitude of having found my son alive, motivated me to do more for our community. I decided that I needed to take action to ensure that we would not be caught unprepared again. Becoming an activist for earthquake safety and preparedness became my mission. I began to participate in community meetings, sharing my story, and encouraging residents to unite to rebuild our village more safely. I proposed creating evacuation plans, regular emergency response training, and the construction of reinforced shelters. The community's response was positive, and many joined me in this effort. I realized that through education and preparation, we could save lives in the future. Over time, we managed to attract the attention of local authorities and humanitarian aid organizations. I worked tirelessly to bring resources and experts who could guide us on how to make our village more resilient. We organized awareness campaigns, distributed emergency kits, and conducted earthquake simulations so that everyone knew how to act in case of another disaster. The community's response was incredible, and the sense of unity and purpose was palpable. My journey as an activist also led me to speak at events and conferences about the importance of preparation for natural disasters. I shared my story on various platforms, highlighting the need for adequate infrastructure and the importance of emergency plans. Each time I told my experience, I felt that I was making a real difference, helping other communities to prepare and protect themselves. The earthquake of 2018 was a tragedy that changed our lives forever, but it also taught us valuable lessons about resilience and solidarity. Today, our village is in the process of recovering, stronger and more united than ever. I continue dedicated to the cause, working to ensure that no family goes through the despair we faced on that terrible morning. The experience transformed me into a tireless advocate for safety and preparedness, and the mission to protect my community and others around the world is something I take very seriously. The day started like any other at the elementary school, where I, Hiroko, was a teacher in Sendai, Japan. The children were excited and full of energy, and I was eager to start another day of lessons. However, everything changed dramatically when the tsunami alert system sounded throughout the school. A massive wave was on its way, and we had little time to react. The sound of the sirens was deafening and immediately created a panic among the students and teachers. The first thing I did was try to stay calm and direct the students to the designated evacuation points. The priority was to ensure the safety of the children, The situation was critical, and every second counted. With a firm voice, I began to organize the students into lines, while other teachers did the same. I led my students out of the school, guiding them to a nearby 2-story building, which we knew was one of the safest points. The walk was tense and quick, with everyone looking back, fearing the arrival of the wave at any moment. Once we reached the building, I took the students to the upper floor and tried to keep them calm, even as panic grew within me. From the second floor, we watched through the window as the wave approached. It was an apocalyptic sight, a wall of water that seemed to swallow everything in its path. In a matter of minutes, the school where we had been just moments before was submerged by the relentless force of the tsunami. The horror of seeing the place where we spent our days being destroyed was indescribable, and the fear of what was to come overwhelmed us. Locked in the building, we heard the destructive sound of the tsunami, the roar of the water destroying everything in its path, and the distant screams of despair. The night was long and terrifying. I did my best to keep the children calm, telling stories and singing songs, trying to divert their attention from what was happening outside. The building shook with the force of the water, but miraculously remained standing. The uncertainty of what awaited us when the water finally receded was overwhelming. The night was a true test of endurance and courage for all of us locked in that 2-story building. The deafening sound of the tsunami continued, echoing through the walls as the water violently struck the structure. The fear was palpable, and panic was always lurking, but I knew I needed to stay calm to provide security for the children. With each new wave that struck, the building shook, and every strange noise made our hearts skip a beat. I tried to keep the children distracted, but it was hard to ignore the destructive sound of the disaster outside. Some children cried softly, while others tried to stay brave. I spent the night walking among them, offering words of comfort and hugs, trying to convey a sense of security that I did not feel myself. The building, despite its seemingly robust construction, was beginning to show signs of wear. The floor shook with each impact of the waves, and I feared that at any moment, the structure might give way. We heard the sounds of debris being dragged by the water, and occasionally, the distant screams of other people trapped in their own battles for survival. It was a vivid nightmare, and all we could do was wait and hope that the worst would pass quickly. Amid the chaos, I tried to think of solutions and contingency plans. If the building began to give way, I needed an escape route or a safer place to take the children. The hours dragged on slowly, and each minute felt like an eternity. The fear and anxiety were almost unbearable, but the responsibility of protecting those precious lives kept me steady. Finally, the first lights of dawn began to appear on the horizon. With the sunrise, the intensity of the tsunami began to decrease. The water, which had swallowed everything in its path, started to recede slowly. The deafening sound of the disaster gave way to an unsettling silence, interrupted only by the occasional sound of falling debris. We looked out, and the devastation was evident. Everything was submerged in mud and debris, and our town seemed unrecognizable. The morning brought a mix of relief and despair. We were alive, but what remained of our world was in ruins. We knew that the real fight was just beginning, the fight to rebuild our lives and our community. As the children gathered around me, I held their small hands and promised that we would get through this together, one step at a time. When the light of dawn finally revealed the devastation around us, I felt a lump in my throat. The city of Sendai was unrecognizable. Homes, schools, shops, everything was submerged in mud and debris. The force of the tsunami had transformed our world into a scene of total destruction. With the children still clinging to me, I slowly descended from the 2-story building, feeling the enormity of the task we had ahead. The first task was to ensure that all the students were safe and accounted for. Amid the destruction, I managed to gather the children, and with the help of some adults who had found refuge in the building, we organized a search and rescue group to find survivors and provide first aid. Each face we saw bore the marks of fear and loss, but also of hope. We began to sift through the rubble, calling out the names of friends and neighbors, looking for any signs of life. The silence was disturbing, broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the debris being moved. Gradually, we found more survivors, many in shock, but alive. We helped everyone we could, sharing supplies and providing emotional support. As the day progressed, rescue teams began to arrive, bringing with them supplies and medical assistance. The community, united by tragedy, worked tirelessly to support one another. The school, now destroyed, became a symbol of our loss but also of our resilience. I decided that my mission would be to help in the recovery and reconstruction of Sendai, starting with education. In the months that followed, I worked alongside volunteers and local authorities to rebuild the city's infrastructure. We organized fundraising campaigns, received donations from other parts of Japan and the world, and slowly began to see the first signs of recovery. The school was rebuilt, this time with enhanced safety measures to protect against future disasters. Each brick laid represented a step towards normalcy. My experience during the tsunami and the terrifying night we spent in the two-story building transformed me. I dedicated myself to teaching about the importance of rapid and effective responses to natural disasters. I created training programs for students and teachers, ensuring that everyone knew how to act in an emergency. The tragedy of 2011 left deep scars, but also strengthened our community and taught us the value of preparation and resilience. Today, Sendai is largely recovered, although the memories of that day will never completely fade. I continue my mission to educate and prepare future generations to face disasters with courage and knowledge. The experience taught me that even in the darkest moments, hope and solidarity can prevail, guiding us toward a safer and more prepared future.